Hello and welcome back to our wonderful International Women's Day panel. I hope many of those of you who enjoyed the panel discussion have managed to make your way over here to our Q&A session. Hello Laura, hello Jan, happy International Women's Day.
Same to you.
Happy International Women's Day.
We're here. Hope you're both having wonderful days. So thank you for rejoining us, everyone. The initial session was pre-recorded as we weren't quite sure on availability for today, but we have managed to find each other again, and so we all wanted to be here live to go through questions. Thank you for sharing comments as you went as well. I think it was a really nice sense of ideas and other initiatives that are happening in other industries as well in some of those comments, which we really value. So thank you very much. We will kick off with I think it was Sylvia's question, which is a big one, so we could talk for a long time about this. But what is the difference between gender equity and gender equality? Do either of you want to jump in and start with that?
Abigail, we were talking about this before, weren't we? So you had a very succinct way of putting it. So why don't you start with that?
Shall I start? Okay. So in my eyes, the difference between gender equity and gender equality is that equality, it means the same treatment for everyone. Equity means that you are able to meet the needs of anyone. So for example, equality might be everyone can walk through the same door. I'm being kind of oversimplifying this a bit, but hopefully this will help. Everyone can walk through the same door. Well, that's all very well and good, but what if the door has, a series of steps up to it? Equity would mean that everyone has the same opportunity to walk through the same door. So there may be a ramp for somebody. There may be, other things to meet the needs of a wide range of people. In terms of the discussion that we have today, with gender, particularly in the publishing industry, gender equality, we might see in some senior leadership teams and boards, we might see a 50-50 male and female, or relatively even split in gender across the board. Obviously, gender doesn't necessarily need to be binary, but 50, a largely 50-50 split. But that might not be equity, because in the wider workforce of publishing, actually about 70% of the workforce identify as female. And so what we're seeing is a lack of equity in the opportunity that people have of certain genders to get to the top. Less succinct than we did in the pre-chat, but hopefully that helps.
And I think what we were talking about before as well is that if everybody is at the table, that people are listened to equally, people's opinions are valued, whoever they are, and also can come down to pay, that different genders aren't paid differently. I mean, you've seen what's happened in Birmingham City Council. They're now in massive debt because they weren't even doing equal pay. So I think it's also about how people are treated in an organisation, and that's where that real equality and equity comes into play.
Very good. Jan, is there anything you want to say?
Yeah, and I would add to that in terms of, but I think the environment that's created in a lot of these spaces can make you feel as though if you are from a different kind of background, that you don't have as much of a right to speak, or that you have to fight to have your voice heard. And that is something that I think is, a stark difference between equality and equity as well. If equality is being able to have a seat at the table, then equity is feeling comfortable that what you have to say will be respected and will be taken on board. So I think that's probably one of the big things as well. But as you say, there's so many myriad of ways, and yeah, really worth taking into account that gender isn't binary. So
Yeah.
there are so many discussions and voices that aren't being included in these spaces that really deserve to, you know, to be heard, and also that we should be looking to enrich our workplaces with these different views.
And I think that speaks to what we were talking about in the panel, which is the culture aspect. You know, equal might be that you have equal numbers of different types of people, but equity is really about having an equitable culture, and that's what International Women's Day is about today, is inspiring inclusive cultures, and inspiring inclusion, and that's the culture. I heard the phrase this week of culture eats strategy for breakfast, which I think is so true, particularly in this. Is if you don't have, you can have the, you know, the best, you know, strategy for inclusivity or equity in the world, but if you don't have the culture to support it, it is gobbled up with your eggs. So there we go. So we have another question here. Thank you for joining us. So what are the top tips you'd give an employer looking to attract more female applicants to a certain role or job description? Well, good.
Shall I start?
Please,
it's funny because
I was going to say, Laura, this is your wheelhouse.
No, well, funny enough, and to be honest, I can't remember if I mentioned this on the chat, but I'd done some research actually. It was for a big corporate organisation, why they weren't getting women applying for a certain technical job, and so I talked to about 10 different organisations where this role existed, and in some organisations there might have only been 2 people doing that role, maybe one was a woman. In some there was 85 people, and maybe there are only 5 women doing it. And so that was really interesting research, but things still came back about language being used, about events maybe that were organised that women couldn't go to perhaps, or didn't want to. It was that very cultural thing, the way people still spoke, the fact that, you know, if you can see it, you can be it. If you haven't got a role model, if you haven't got somebody to see who is doing that job, and I think that comes up a lot in all sorts of different careers. You need to be able to have role models to see people doing it. So if you can see somebody who looks like you doing something, then you know that, okay, you know, that I can perhaps do that. As well as, and I think we talked about this before, and I know I've been guilty of it in the past as well, sort of job descriptions which aren't good enough in terms of they're overly complicated, saying too many things, and women, as we know, won't often apply for something if they feel they can't do perhaps 80-90% of that job, and research shows that men often would apply if they can do less than that. So it's trying to simplify things, think of the language being used in job descriptions, as well as perhaps thinking of, can some roles be done part-time? How can you make it easier for people to be able to apply for these roles so that they can do them, and to talk about that up front as well? So I think there are loads of things that organisations can do, and some of them are really simple. And also saying about the fact that there might be network groups in the organisation to help with certain things, perhaps as a parenting one, perhaps as a women's health one, all sorts of stuff. So there is lots that can be done, I would say.
I completely agree, and I think that's where we're looking at kind of skills-based hiring and job descriptions versus experience. I think, you know, an example, just you mentioned events law, and I think that's spot on. Is you know it's a prerequisite of this role that this person has done lots of professional international travel, for example. Well, that's automatically ruling out people that might have a lot of caring responsibilities outside of work, whatever gender they are. But data shows that women are more likely to have caring responsibilities out of work, whether that's children or elderly parents. And so, you know, what are the actual skills behind that experience that you need? Is it the languages? Is it the ability to, you know, to organize a diary? Is it the ability to understand and empathize with different cultures? All of those might be accessible to someone that hasn't had the experience, or all those skills might be present in someone that hasn't had the experience of lots of international travel. So I think that's looking at a more skills-based hiring is what I say to that. There was another question from the initial discussion, slightly more general, looking at culture slightly more generally. Attracting and retaining Gen Z is said to be one of the biggest challenges for hiring in the next 5 years. Are there any specific steps you'd recommend companies take to engage this generation? And perhaps we just want to start by taking a view of whether we think it is one of the biggest challenges, how it's a challenge, and discuss that with before we go into kind of recommendations.
Yeah, and what's your thoughts?
I don't know, because I think I technically am on the cusp of millennial Gen Z, and I think it could be a challenge, but I also think it's a great opportunity, because even as I was growing up, I would say I'm more of a digital native, but I'm nowhere near, the level of, people like my sister, who's 11 years younger than me. She's firmly someone that I would say is Gen Z, and just the way that she communicates, the way that she thinks about the world. I think the one thing that I've really come to admire in her and the people from kind of her age group is that they don't have that gap between their thoughts and actions when it comes to activism and things that they care about. And I know, Laura, that we've spoken a lot about how in the workplace, you should be well, not that you should, but maybe that, there should be an element of activism within your role, if that's something that you think you can kind of muster at that point. Obviously, everyone goes through different life stages at different times, but yes, they don't have that moment where they see an injustice and then they have to think about how they deal with it. They just do it. And I think that's one of the great things about Gen Z, and that might be one of the things that is a challenge, because how do you manage those kind of expectations in terms of salary and pay and progression? And I think it's really important that the person who's asked this question has said attracting and retaining, because my response to the previous question was, I would have flipped it around and asked them, okay, what are your top tips for retaining female employees in the workplace? Because those two things go hand in hand. If you can retain more people from a diverse background within your workforce, then it's going to be easier to attract them for all the reasons that Laura has said. You can't be what you can't see, but also there'll be that pipeline, there'll be that mentorship, there'll be those networks in place. And so I think more than anything else, think about how you're helping to retain the kind of younger millennial, older Gen Z, and move them up the career ladder, and how you're helping them to progress. And I think once those paths have been more clearly navigated, hopefully attracting Gen Z will be part and parcel of your culture. It'll be part of your DNA within a company. But yeah, really interested to see what you and what Abigail and Laura have to say as well.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because, and some people say every generation of people want different things. Every generation has perhaps has lived through different things and different priorities. And I say hats off to a lot of people who now will say, well, we need more work-life balance, or we need things to be different. Because when I first started off in TV, I used to get picked up every night at 9 or 10 o'clock at night. That was just my working day all the time, and I didn't really think about it. And now that and then you get to a point in your life you think that's absolutely ridiculous. Why would you do that? But so I think things shift, and that's a really good thing, and it's an important thing. But I think the challenge of keeping people is not just necessarily Gen Z. It's for all sorts of different generations of people. And now there's definitely an issue with women over 50 in the workplace, for example. People over 50, but more women as well, for some of their reasons. Abigail, you just touched on about caring responsibilities and various other things, but also health is a massive thing, and women's health, which hasn't been tackled so much. And Dame Leslie Regan is really doing a fantastic job of trying to highlight that and look and work with showing what organisations should be doing as well. So I think one of the things is if there's something missing in your organisation, or you think, well, if this could happen, it would make things so much better because we'd be able to do this, or we'd feel differently about working, then I'm all for saying, well, then, you know, say it, see what you can do, you know. So I think
if you're listening to this, then you've got something in your head that's just popped in, which often happens in these panels. Write it down and go and do it this afternoon.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's also how you change things for people coming up behind you as well, you know, definitely. And that's an important thing.
Yeah.
I think if getting ready for the next generation is something that you're particularly interested in, there is a seminar at London Book Fair at 2:00 on the Wednesday on this topic, with a great panel chaired by Susie Asprey, RMD, as well, which might go into this in more detail outside of the International Women's Day conversation. So do attend that, which is next week, which is very exciting. Before we wrap up, any final thoughts on inclusive cultures, investing in gender equity, from our wonderful panelists?
Well, I think we talked a lot about it in the session, didn't we? About how, you know, it's for me one of the things doing now about trying to highlight on investing in women, because it's something that's been so underlooked and overlooked rather, and ignored really for years and years. And so that's a big focus. You know, there's amazing entrepreneurs out there. There's so many fantastic people of all genders, you know, who are doing amazing things. But, you know, I do some work with women, and I think, God, these women are incredible. Some of the ideas that people come up with, the execution, that hard work that it takes to realise success. And so where you can support people like that, you know, and help people, and as you go through your career, it's always important that you help, however that is, helping somebody with advice, mentoring somebody. If somebody helps you, you pay it back by helping somebody else. And so that's always important to think about.
Leave the ladder down behind you.
100%. Yeah. And I think as well, just to build on that, there's something really wonderful about seeing that growth in an organization, like overall as well, like the culture shifting and the culture changing. And I think especially when it's something new, like you said, Laura, I remember the first time that the company that we were both at started the Menopause Network, which you spearheaded. And I went along to one of the sessions, and it was so wonderful to learn about this in a way that included everyone. So there were people who were sharing like, oh, my partner's going through this right now, like I really want to learn how to support them, or like my mother is having difficulty and I really want to understand how I can, you know, better be there for her, or I think I might be like all of those different stories got tied in. But what actually came out of it was that everyone learned something, everyone won, and everyone expanded their knowledge and their horizons. And that sense of being able to weave, you know, other people's experiences into your own compassion, I think can be so powerful at the end of the day, because then it just means that whatever you do takes into account more and more of the lived experiences of everyone else. So yeah, I think it's those small moments of kindness that really, really start to ripple outwards, and where you create those safe spaces, you create those inclusive spaces. But it does take a lot, and it can be quite slow, but I think it is ultimately something worth pursuing, especially if you're already here, because you definitely want to do something.
Let's all ripple out from there. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Good. Wonderful. Let the kindness ripple out. And thank you, Jan. That's a very inspiring note to end on. So hopefully everyone listening has got something out of this conversation. I know I have, and continue to, as I carry on the conversations with these wonderful panelists and others in and out of the industry. Looking forward to a more inclusive in 2024 and beyond, as we all invest more in gender equity, both in terms of time and policies. and energy. So thank you very much. Join us for our next Inspired Live on LinkedIn on the 25th of April at 1 o'clock. As a reminder, that will be a celebration of the diversity in our industry with Sandra De Silva, MD of Sweet Cherry Publishing, and Brinley Weston, Director from Ingram Publisher Services UK. In the meantime, happy International Women's Day. Enjoy your weekend and see you all soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.